Good evening. It is Wednesday, September 17th, 2014. It is 5:32 p.m. This is our monthly meeting of the Urbana IDOT Traffic Stop Data Task Force. Could I have the clerk please call the roll?
Patricia Avery, Andrew Charles, Shinjini Chattopadhyay, Nicole Anderson Cobb, Alejandra Coronel,
Present.
Eric Jacobson,
Present.
Will Kiles, Peter Resnick,
Here.
Chandra Somerville, and Paul Testa.
Present.
All right, we have a quorum. We also have a member who we've not had the pleasure of being introduced to before, so I wanted to give you the opportunity. We all went around the table originally. After the meeting, I'm sure we'll introduce ourselves, but if you would introduce yourself.
So, my name is
Oh, and if you would turn on the microphone, make sure the little green light is on. Thanks.
So my name is Shinjini, and I'm a visiting assistant professor in the College of Business. I have a joint appointment with the finance and the strategy groups. I graduated with a PhD in finance last year from Columbia Business School, and part of my dissertation work looked at discrimination in labor markets and implications for entrepreneurship. So that's about it. I live in Urbana. I have two small kids. They're 4, and my husband is a professor in the electrical engineering department at UIUC.
Welcome. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. So, starting with the next item on the agenda, which is approval of the agenda, do I have a motion to approve?
I move to approve the agenda.
And a second?
Second.
All right, so I have a motion by Eric, a second by Alejandra. Any discussion of the agenda, any changes, additions? All right. All those in favor of approval, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right. And moving on, we have the minutes of the August 20th meeting. I don't know if folks have had a chance to look those over, but I would entertain a motion for approval of those minutes. Take a quick
I
peek.
move to approve the minutes of August 20th.
All right, I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second the motion.
All right, so I have a motion by Paul, a second by Eric. Any discussion, any corrections or changes? Relatively straightforward. And when the minutes are posted, they also have all the attachments from the meeting. Is that correct?
Yes, we're trying to make sure that happens.
Excellent.
And
All
trying to
right.
make sure they stay up there.
So with that, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Great, and that motion carries. All right, so moving on to old business. We're going to run through our subcommittees. We got quite the chunk of data from the Statistical Analysis Committee this week, and I'm told that Paul has prepared a little presentation to walk us through it, which I would find exceedingly helpful.
Yes.
So why don't we start by tossing it over to Paul and let you walk us through your presentation.
Great. Well, thanks very much, and I appreciate you taking the time to look at this, what I would call a sort of a work in progress. And the goal of the document, and I think the presentation today, is just to give you a sense of kind of, you know, what's available in these data, what kinds of questions can we answer with them, and maybe what kinds of questions do we need to look elsewhere. So for today, focus on a couple of sort of substantive areas that we can look at that the data can tell us something. First, variation in terms of race and the type of stop. In total, from 2004 to 2013, there are 36,258 stops. By race, that is sort of about 19,500 stops for whites, 12,000 stops for African Americans, about 1,300 for Hispanics, and just over 3,000 for Asians. And so we'll look at sort of variations in the type of stop, sort of 3 types of stops that are reported: moving violations, equipment violations, and license plates and registration. We'll talk next about sort of the outcome of the stop. There are, seems to me, at least 3 outcomes that are in the data that we would care about. whether the person was given a citation or a written warning, whether a search was conducted, and whether contraband was found. And I'll talk more about that in detail. I'll talk about sort of the demographic information that we have in the data, some additional analysis that I think individuals both on the committee and the public have requested, and what we can do to try and answer those questions. And then I'll talk a little bit more in detail about, one test for whether racial profiling is occurring. If you made it all the way through there, you'll know that the results are sort of difficult or hard to interpret. So I'll try and do my best to clarify that. And if at any point along the way something I'm saying or the figures or the words don't make, if you need clarification, please stop, and I'll do my best to try and do so. So.
And I just want to note for the record that Ms. Avery and Mr. Kiles have arrived. Welcome. And we've just started Paul's presentation on the data he's collected and analyzed. So we're just at the introduction.
All right. Great. So first, just in terms of the type of stop, as I said, there are 3 types of stops: moving violations, equipment, and license plate and registration. Some of you may wonder what those exactly mean. All I can tell you is that for moving violations, we have further information. There are sort of 6 categories of moving violations. For equipment or license plate and registration, the data don't tell us anything beyond that was the primary reason for the stop. In general, try and talk about just sort of the total frequency, how often did these things stop. Then we'll look at sort of, for the total amount of moving violations in a year, what proportion were from whites, African Americans, Hispanics, and Asians. And then for a given racial group, sort of what percentage of their total stops are accounted for by this type of violation or this type of reason for a stop. So just here, this just shows in the upper left the total stops for a given year. It varies between about 3,000 and 4,000. There's a fairly large dip after 2009 and then a rise in 2013. Moving violations make up the majority of the types of stops, and followed by equipment violations, license plate, and registration. If you look at sort of, these are the total numbers. If you look at for a specific type of stop, whites tend to make up between 55 and or 50 and 60% of the total stops, and there's some variation within. So particularly stops that were equipment-based, or the motivation, or the reason for a stop was equipment or license plate or registration, African Americans make up a higher proportion of the total stops in a given year. If you look at sort of just for a specific racial group, how many of their stops were for a particular reason, you see whites and Asians tend to be more likely to be stopped for a moving violation, or the drivers who are stopped are more likely stopped because of a moving violation, whereas rates of stops for equipment or license plates and registration are somewhat higher among African Americans and Hispanics. So far, yeah.
And so am I reading this right? In 2013, we're seeing a decrease in moving violations and an increase in equipment and license registration, or just percentage-wise that's the change?
Yeah, the percentage compared to 2012, there are decreases for African Americans and Hispanics from.
Well, it
Yeah.
looks like a decrease for everybody for moving violations and an increase for everybody for the other 2 kinds of violations.
Yeah, I'd say. So the rate of increase maybe in the equipment and higher than the rate of increase in moving violations is what could.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So just moving violations most common, African Americans more likely to be pulled over for equipment, license plate, and registration. I can't speak to what an equipment violation reason for stop would be, or license plates less registration. Presumably, if you're missing a license plate, they pull you over, but I can, yeah.
The equipment violations or moving violations are the actual driving violations, speeding, running a stop sign, running a stop light, improper lane usage, things like that. Equipment violations are headlight out, tail light out, something that's not working properly on your car. On a motorcycle, it'd be no safety glasses would be an equipment violation. And then the license registration violations are simply improper display of the plates, expired registration plates, things along those lines.
Thank you. So, in terms of the outcomes of stop we might care about, 3 basic outcomes: whether a citation or written warning was written, whether a search was conducted, and this includes both, searches that were, I guess, probable cause, or and also consent searches that were requested. Overall, the number of consent searches is relatively low, between 10 and 15 in a given year, relative to the total amount of searches. And then whether contraband was found, and that includes sort of drugs, paraphernalia, alcohol, or weapons. And we could break those out separately by category if people want. So again, starting with citations, total about, between 2,000 and 2,500 in a given year. Again, sort of consistent with the breakdown of the type of stops. Moving violations, equipment violations make up the majority of those. In terms of who gets a ticket, or the proportion of total tickets for a type of stop, here I think that what jumps out maybe is that African Americans make up a much larger proportion of the citations issued for equipment and license plate and registration. Yeah.
I have a stop or a question. I'm not sure it's ever differentiated between, but are the number of violations, are those reflecting the number of citations? Are those reflecting the number of citations that are written for the reason for the stop, or just overall citations?
So in the data, they have a variable that says result of stop, and it's either citation or written warning. And so these are showing you what proportion of equipment stops resulted in a citation for a given race. So, no, this is showing you, for all of the citations issued, what proportion were given to whites, African Americans, Hispanics, and Asians.
Well,
So-
I'll give you an example, and I don't know if when an officer stops a car on the IDOT sticker form, they fill out the reason for the stop on the sticker form, and it may be different than the reason for the citation that was issued, or the warning that was issued. So an example would be if an officer sees a car with the headlight out and says, hey, I better let them know that they have a headlight out, and stops the car to tell the person you have a headlight out, with the full intention that they're going to give them a written warning and send them on their way. And it turns out the person has no insurance, and the officer goes, oh, okay, I'm going to actually write you a ticket for the no insurance. They don't end up writing a warning ticket for the headlight out, but they note that as the reason for the stop.
Yeah.
So it would be an equipment violation, but then it might be documented as I don't know, I guess that would probably fall still into equipment. Maybe
Right.
They find out that there's, yeah.
So that is the question, maybe, would no insurance, would that fall under license registration?
Well,
category?
or even, I guess the question is, what percentage of the citations are for the reason
Right.
the person was stopped? Because something else, or what comes out of that, and do the numbers look differently if you look at just, what the intent of the officer was when he stopped the car? Did they act on something, they find out something else that
So I think
prompted them to act differently?
there's a preliminary question here, Paul. This slide and the one before it,
Yeah.
is this equipment citations, or is this a citation due to an equipment stop?
This is due to an equipment stop was a citation.
Was a citation issue?
Okay.
So
Yeah.
we don't have the numbers on
Why the citation
what the
is-
citation is for.
Not to my knowledge in the data. I just have, if you have a way of distinguishing that.
Yeah, I think, and we can go back and double check this, but I think as you look at the spreadsheet, there is a reason for stop, and then there is a reason for citation or something like that. The two are differentiated. And I think when I read this, I thought we were looking at the reason for the citation, what's indicated for the citation, which is separate from obviously the reason for initiating the stop. And what you're, I think, bringing out is we could look at the relationship between the two and to see whether and how many instances or the proportion of instances that a stop for equipment violation actually ends up in a citation for an equipment violation or ends up in a citation for something else down the line. But if I remember the data correctly, I think those two are fairly well differentiated.
Ms.
So-
Avery.
But, yeah.
Ms. Avery, you had a question.
My question is, which was interesting that you brought it up, because I was, that would be some data that I would like to see collected, is the reason for the stop might be an equipment violation, but the citation might be written for multiple other reasons, like driving a suspended license or no insurance, and then the citation is written for that reason. Is there any way that we can collect that? As the chair of the the Community Impact Committee, one of the things that we are looking at is the financial and economic impact that a traffic stop has on an individual. In terms of this disparity, when a citation is written, this could matter quite a bit and have an impact on our report as well. So is there any way that we can collect that information or extrapolate what these citations, what actually takes place at a stop when a citation is written? Can we extrapolate whether the reason for the stop is why the citation was given, or did it go into something else?
I guess all I can say is that in the data I have, it's just result of stop. So it's possible that they have both the reason for the citation and if we have that data, we certainly can compare. But in what I have for the years I have, I don't have that currently available. But that's definitely something.
And Todd, your impression is that we can get that?
I think we can get that data.
And add that into
Or at
the
least I think
data
it's a
set.
possibility we can check on it specifically.
Yeah. Okay.
Great. That would be very helpful.
Great.
Thanks.
That could change the
Okay. Again, these things, differences in the rates of citation sort of translate into, for a African American or Hispanic pulled over, you're more likely, for an equipment violation, more likely to have received a citation. So relative to all the stops for an African American or Hispanic in a given year, 50% to 75% result in citations rather than written warnings.
I have a
Yeah.
question. I know your statistics don't tell that, but my question would be, is there any way we can find out why is that?
So,
That was actually the question.
Your
that-
microphone.
Sorry. That was actually the question as we were sitting and talking. Our purpose, what we wanted to do. I don't know if Paul already said that, was we wanted to provide the raw data so that we could have discussion and conversation. A lot of times you get data and it's already interpreted for you, and so by providing the raw data, it allows us to have these type of discussions. But that was the question as we were talking that we wanted to kind of look into more, was why that actually happens, that minorities are more likely to get citations. That's definitely something we talked about.
And I think this is a very good thing for us to start tracking is there's going to be a bunch of these. As I was going through the report at home, I had a bunch of, wait, why did that happen? Different drops or rises in rates or distinctions between. Some of these, I think, might be interesting questions to ask the police department itself. Like, was there a change in procedure from year to year or a change in reporting? And some of these, I think we're going to have to dig a little deeper. But I do think we should start tracking all of these issues. Yeah, Shinjini and then Andrew.
So I wanted to say that none of this is scaled by the actual proportion of people living in Champaign-Urbana, right? So once we do that, the graphs might change pretty dramatically because if you look at the actual numbers, so African Americans make up 12% of the U.S. population, and so if you scale it, I think you would see a completely dramatically different, and especially how many Hispanics are in Champaign County.
Yeah.
So relative to that, I think that you'd see the gaps widening pretty dramatically. So who has the data on actual population living here?
So I can jump ahead if you'd like, which is, one thing I think we're looking into is to say, here is sort of a census data on racial compositions of neighborhoods, right? And we can pair that with the geographic data of how these stops are recorded, and then use that to sort of maybe construct baselines and re-weight the data. But I guess in this initial kind of, here's what we have, I just wanted to say, here's what's in the data, and then get your feedback on, why sometimes the data can tell us why, sometimes we have to ask other things. But no, I agree. What I will say, sort of going back to all of these things, so if you look at, there are significant gaps. First, the rate of searches has gone down, so just moving forward over the years. And part of that may be procedural, part of that might be reporting. One of the things that's difficult is that the sort of, I get the sense that the forms have changed, or the way the data are coded at least changes over time. But if you still look at this in terms of all the searches that were conducted in a given year, African Americans make up a much larger proportion of those searched. If you look at sort of, conditional on you being stopped, how likely are you to be searched? Hispanics and African Americans more likely to be searched. And I will say sort of just, what could explain, I guess, these gaps, that we've done some analysis just sort of saying, well, let's take all the other variables we have in the data that might explain this, like the age of the driver, the race, where they were stopped, why they were stopped, throw those into a model, and these gaps between sort of whites and minorities still remain significant. So,
Andrew had a question, and then Will.
Just a comment and a question on where you were before, which was, I think, percentage of stops with, maybe back.
Sorry.
That's okay.
There we are.
It was actually percentage of stops where violations were issued, and there were a couple of things that jumped off the page, and then a comment on something else. One was that when you look at the moving violation percentage of citations, you see that it's actually very close and seems to almost come together in 2012 there, which represents a positive thing for me when I look at it from the police standpoint, as far as the types of citations that generally yield moving violations, or the types of activities that generally yield moving violations, and that is patrol activities that are specifically looking for specific traffic issues. And if that's the case, the officer should have a predetermined mindset on, when I see this behavior, I'm going to either write a citation or not. And so those numbers are very close, and that's really a positive thing. The percentage of, and I noticed on here that, like in the license and registration, the percentage with citation seems to be kind of all over the place, and I'm guessing that that's limited data. That's smaller sample size.
Yeah, for the relative size of Hispanics in the population of drivers pulled over, it's relatively small, and so you get a lot of year-to-year variation that could account for some of those jumps. Yeah.
So Will and then Eric?
Okay. And definitely, I'd be interested to, as we continue to progress in the kind of discussion on the data, to get you all's take on the data. I know that one of the things that we talked about earlier last week was timing, and, from, data to solution, and to be able to present some solutions so that this group, this team effort that we're putting together actually puts forth some good solutions that helps fix the problem. And so just looking at the data, understanding the data is the data, it's raw. We didn't put our own spins on it or this or that. We could have, but we decided that, we would allow you all to determine, and the public to determine where the conversation goes from here. But one of the things that was brought out last week was just timing, and how much time that we really have to analyze data to coming up with viable solutions. So really interested to kind of get your all's take on what you think about the data, how we should move forward, so that we could get into solutions, from here forth.
Absolutely. Eric?
Yeah, the issue was raised about, we do know the racial composition of the population. What I think we haven't broken out yet is the age composition within each of the racial or ethnic groups, because we know that young males are bad drivers. The accident statistics tell us that. So we expect young males to have more, they should have more moving violations. And if there's an age, if there's a different age distribution within the subpopulations we're looking at, then it, our reading should be informed by that. The bad driving, actually, I don't remember if I sent the accident rates by age. Did I send that around to the committee, or did that go around? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So it goes down. It goes down as you get older until you get to be my age, and then it starts to curl up again, but for a different reason.
All right, so Paul, if you would plow
Sure.
on here.
So I guess we've talked a bit about searches at declining frequency, still a disparate amount in terms of what racial groups make up the total proportion of searches in a given year, and then the probability that if you're stopped, how likely are you to have been searched. Turning next to contraband, I guess one thing is, if you think about the scales on these axes, we're talking about thousands of stops in a year. These are now in the sort of tens and hundred in terms of whether contraband was found during a traffic stop. Again, sort of broken out by, of all the stops in which contraband was found, what proportion were from a particular ethnic group or racial and ethnic group. And then for each racial group's total amount of stops, what proportion was contraband found. So just sort of overview, more likely to receive a citation, searches have declined over time. Why that is, I can't sort of say from the data alone. So again, like if you say there are lots of reasons why, minorities might be more likely to get a ticket because they're a younger driving population, they drive older cars, they drive in different neighborhoods, who the officers in those neighborhoods might have different ways of enforcing traffic laws. You can throw those all into models and say, do the differences between whites and minorities still exist? And generally, for the most part, those differences are still significant. But there's some more work to be done on that. And so what are those sort of things that might predict variation? Just in terms of demographics in the data, gender, driver age, vehicle age, driver residency. So I think what surprised me here, I guess, is just that, particularly among Asians and Hispanics, drivers are much more likely to be male. So this is what proportion of those stopped were female. Also somewhat true of African Americans, although maybe less so in recent years. Terms of the demographics, like Eric said, sort of the dispersion in age is much greater among whites, so they tend to be slightly older than minority drivers and have a much larger range in terms of the sort of, this is about, I think it's 70% of all white stops are contained in this box versus 70% of African American stops. So you have sort of similar small differences. African Americans, Hispanics tend to drive cars that are slightly smaller or slightly older. So I was intrigued by this. It turns out it's not someone driving a 1909 Model T. I think it's a 1989 Geo, and there was just, so that's one thing to maybe look at more closely is what sort of coding data or errors are in these. Just sort of disappointing. In terms of residency, about 50% have an address in Urbana. That rises to 75% looking just at Urbana-Champaign. Local is including St. Joe and Savoy. I don't know how you define local. Within 50 miles, it's about 85% of all the stops in the year. Chicago drivers make up just 1%, and then out of state are only about 2% of the total. So just to review, and then turning, I guess, next, there are some additional analyses. One thing to look at maybe is at the duration of a stop. Whether the same person is stopped multiple times, how much variation is there in the sort of proportions of minorities stopped in different regions of Urbana, and then how much variation do we see by, particular officers, some of whom may be assigned to different beats or different sort of traffic enforcement. So looking at the duration of the stop, this just shows you kind of the distribution. So the solid lines are, 50% of the stops took 10 minutes or less for whites, African Americans, Hispanics, Asians. It's slightly higher for Hispanics. And what you really see is that there is of Hispanic stops, there's a much greater range. So there are some stops that take much longer. We can ask sort of why that is. Yeah.
Yeah, I would suggest that, and we've discussed this, that some of that is licensing issues,
Yeah.
and that also was represented in the graph with percentage of
License and registration.
equipment violations
Yeah.
that ended up in a citation. And that is, there's an equipment violation, and then you make contact with the driver, and then there's a licensing issue. And that sometimes, and with the language issue thrown in, that lengthens out the stops. I think that's why, or that's represented in the graph on the lower left-hand corner, where you see that the 95th percentile really drags into some long stops, and those are where
Yeah.
there's a lot of efforts being made to find out who is this person, and are they really that person?
Yeah.
I'm trying to track the social impact of the traffic stops as well. So I'd be interested in knowing, now that we're in additional analyses, the number of, not only the duration is important, but I also want to know how many officers were called to that particular stop. I've seen a number of multiple cars on a traffic stop. So is it possible that we can get that information as well?
So not in the data I have. I don't know, Todd.
And I think present answer is I don't know.
Sorry.
I can think of some ways to do it, but I'm not exactly sure if any of them are practicable, so I'll have to look into that.
Well, there's no way that we will know if there was a traffic stop made, whether or not there was additional backup call for that stop. There's no way that we can track that information.
So I recently had cause to talk to the police department about getting some statistics. I'm sure they have all the data. Whether it's something they can dump in a report to get those numbers in the order that you're talking about is the interesting question. I know the thing I asked for, they literally had to go through by hand and pull out each particular thing that I was looking for. So it's going to depend on what data is available.
My guess is that they would be able to, without too much difficulty, tell you how many traffic stops or what percentage of traffic stops ended up with a second vehicle at them. If you start trying to divide them by what the race of the driver was, it is going to be back at going through it by hand.
So we'll definitely put that on our list of things to investigate. Eric?
But I wonder if a proxy for that would be the fraction of stops that actually resulted in an arrest. Because you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that if you've stopped somebody, if you've stopped somebody and it may have originated as purely a traffic stop, but if you think there's reason for an arrest, you would sort of automatically call for backup in that case.
Yes, I think that's fair to say.
So if the, so perhaps if I wonder if it's easier to get the statistics on whether, on whether there was an arrest, which might be a proxy for the thing that you're looking for, Pat.
I don't know, but I can give you a scenario, one that I know of personally. So it's not something that I heard, it's something that I know. There was a stop because of an equipment violation, I guess a expired tag on a specific car. The car was pulled over for that reason. That was the reason for the stop. There were 2 young African-American males in the car, in the vehicle. Before the stop was completed, there was 2 other cars there on the scene. Don't know why, just there. There was then a search, the dogs were called out for search of the car. Don't know why that happened either. So before the initial stop was because there was a expired license plate. Before it was over, there were three cars plus one that was carrying a dog. So there was 4 vehicles. I think it was a total waste of taxpayer dollars for one stop. There was a citation. The only thing that happened was at that particular stop, when it was all said and done, there was a citation given for what the initial stop was for, which was an expired license plate.
And that's an interesting case because Eric's proxy would not pick that up if there was no arrest. So it might still be useful to see if we can grab that data independent. The correlation is going to be the tricky part. Are we going to be able to see stops, not arrest, with multiple vehicles called out? Because that's the interesting number from what you're describing.
Well, the reason why I bring that up to make it as a particular incident that I know of personally is because one of the things that we are sitting here trying to figure out, is there any racial profiling going on? And if you would ask those 2 young men if they were profiled, their answer would be yes. So in terms of how we are utilizing our law enforcement agencies, is this what we want? Is this how we want our officers to utilize their time? On one stop, 4 cars, I mean, that's the questions that I think we need to be asking ourselves as a society. Is this what we're expecting our officers to do when they're out patrolling for traffic violations? So that's the reason why I brought that up, and and if there's any way that we can find that out, that will help us to answer the question, is this how we want to move forward with the way we are policing and with our moving violations?
Yes, Nicole?
Just a follow-up question. I've submitted, for those of you who have
Do you have your
come in
microphone on?
late, for those of you who've come in late, I've submitted 3 pages of questions that I hope that we will be taking up over the course of our time together. But just in relation to the duration of stop, I mean, is there an explanation as to why white drivers experience the shortest stops of those documented on the flip side of this conversation? And how do we defend or support that practice? I mean, again, it's something that we all have to get our heads around. I have some additional questions, but I think Paul is going to get to them
I didn't see who.
later.
It doesn't
No.
matter, we're all at the same time.
Please, go ahead.
And I think that, Andrew, I think that you and the, I was gonna say, the Urbana Police Department would be great in helping to ask the why factor, because while data may not always be quantified, again, looking at the timing issue, the issues that are presented, the why, the how, what happens when there's a traffic stop, how did, 4 officers get called to, 1 stop. I think more so what we're getting into is what we kind of start talking about at the coffee table is the whys and the hows, because then with understanding, can we really move forward, and maybe you don't have all the answers, which I'd imagine that you have some, but not all. And, that's where I think that the police department in general will be very helpful in helping us understand the why and the how.
Andrew,
Well,
please.
I think that, we have to be careful about not being bogged down in anecdotal. I mean, we can talk about those things a lot. We have to look at what it is we're seeing with the different data we're coming in. And I'm looking at the data of the duration of stops, and until you get to the 95th percentile, I see a lot of similarities in these graphs. There are variables that may come into play more for one race or another. Whether somebody has their driver's license with them at the time of the stop or not makes a difference, a significant difference in the length of the stop. If there's a language barrier, that makes a significant difference in the duration of the stop, because if I'm going to try to explain adequately to someone who is not a native speaker, it's going to take me longer to do it. So there are things that are going to add to length of stop, but if I'm seeing a variation of a minute over the average, I don't think that that's, I'm actually very happy to see that. But I think Ms. Avery touched on something that's very key to the heart of what we're trying to look at, and that is, what is it that we want from the police department? And because the police department truly should reflect the community. So as a whole, what is it that we want? Now, we have to be careful that we don't stray into, we're trying to set the policies and practices of the police department, because while it may be completely unnecessary that there were 4 officers on the stop, it may be completely necessary. Or it may have been something that was completely unrelated to the stop. But as far as what the police department's doing with their time, that should be a reflection of what the community is wanting from them. And there are benefits and costs to being farther one direction or the other. With one direction being a total police state and the other direction being total anarchy, I don't think we want to be at either end, but where in the middle do we want to slide? And is the police department receptive to where we want to be is kind of the question that I think we have to ask.
Well, what we are here talking about is traffic stop, not criminal investigations. We're talking about traffic stops. So you're right. We need to talk about, in terms of where we, as a community, how do we want to patrol for traffic stops? Is it reasonable and to have multiple cars? I can understand. How do you know moving into if the reason for the stop was a expired sticker? How do you account for? That's what I don't understand. So I think that there's a lot of room for questioning, and we can go delve into that a little bit more when we have a little bit more information.
Yeah,
So, yes, Eric and Alejandra, please.
So I think that I just want to pick up on the question of whether or not we're talking about criminal investigations, because I think that these are not completely separable. So I was very late sending anything in, but I've sent to you 3 documents that I thought were particularly important on that. They all have to do with what are called investigative traffic stops. That is because, and the underlying premise for that is that police officers may choose or not to choose, may not choose to make a stop based on similar traffic circumstances. And what has been considered a legitimate reason for the courts, for the officer to distinguish, is whether there is a legitimate investigative component to the stop. And so one of the papers that I gave you is pretty long and pretty dense, which is a review of Supreme Court decisions on that, and the definitive Supreme Court decisions on that. And then there's a second one that's quite briefer, which is actually a primer for police officers that sort of summarizes the court decisions and outlines procedure for that. And then the third one is from a totally different perspective. It's a big summary of driver responses to whether they feel, how they feel they've been treated in stops. And that's one where it doesn't reflect people who've had complaints who filed complaints against the police, but it's a total cross-section. And they look at how people feel about this as a function of race. So I don't know, there's probably every police force in the United States uses traffic stops as an investigative tool. I'm certain that that's true. I don't know. I haven't surveyed everyone, but I believe that's true. And so the hazard there, and this is reflected in one of the papers, is that this can be used in a racially prejudicial way, that you could cover up under the cover of a legitimate investigative tool. You could cover pure racial profiling. So I guess that one of the places I'd like us to go before we finish our deliberations by April is to get the police department's take and their principles on how traffic stops are used as an investigative tool, and what are the guidelines, what are the criteria for doing that, in a way that's not racial or ethnic profiling.
Alejandra.
Well, in addition, I want to talk about something that I just learned based off ride-alongs that I have been done for a number of years with different police departments. And it's interesting how we as a citizen sometimes we speak with law enforcement and we don't realize how we talk. Because when we say it's just a driver license, and I used to say this to the chief, all police department, I always say, it's just a driver license. They don't have a driver license. And then just get a ticket for that. That word just, it's a traffic violation. And even though we think, well, it's just because the person doesn't have a driver license and they gotta stop. I can tell you for the Latino community perspective is a huge problem. And it was for years before because there was an enforcement with ICE that they say if you don't have, you have to stop a person that doesn't have, or there was a stop for the traffic violation. If the person doesn't have a driver license and it doesn't have a proof or any kind of ID, you're gonna get arrested. And it carry on to different things, like find out when they go to jail that they don't have permission to be in this country and they get deported. And it was for the traffic violation that the person commit, and it's no that that it was targeting. Or what we need to learn as a citizen is that if we have or we commit any traffic stop, that it will be a consequence for any other things. And we have this opportunity with this task force that not only we're gonna find the why and how, but when we found that why and how, we can teach our community to see how they are gonna be able to interact with law enforcement, and we're gonna avoid those kind of issues. Now we have, in terms of the Latino community, they have now the opportunity of having a driver license, so work to get the driver license, because that is gonna be a way to avoid any kind of consequence or any kind of further investigation about what is your status in the country, because you have a document that you can produce. And it's the same thing about getting all this information about the moving violation, the license registration. If the police department can tell us what are the expectations of the police department, there is a way for the community to know how to avoid those stops, in my opinion. I think that it's no just, we need to find out what is the issue or if it's any kind of profiling, but in the meantime, we need to see that is violation that is being occurred by our citizens, and we need to educate our community too.
And that sounds to me like a huge part of this sort of community impact issue. One of the things that I'm thinking as I listen to this discussion is there's going to be some stuff that we may not be able to get out of the data that's available to us, or at least in finite time. That doesn't mean that we should leave this out of our final report. That this is important impact stuff that we need to account for. And I think we have to come up with a way to identify those issues where we think as a task force, look, the city has to start collecting this data in a more accessible way, because this can have a huge impact on the community, or this can have a huge impact on the way we decide that we would like our police to be behaving. And so we might end up with recommendations of these need to be clearly identified issues that the police start investigating in a regular way and start reporting in a regular way, even if we don't have the precise data at this point. So I'm hoping, I'm trying to track some of these issues, but I hope we're all kind of keeping track of these as we go forward. I'm cognizant of the time here, so why don't we scoot through the rest of the data that Paul has to present, any particular important ones, because I do want to leave time for other people to comment and to get public input and any
All right,
staff
so I will.
input.
I'll speed it up. The next slide just shows you proportion of people who are in the data stopped multiple times based only on their last name or their full name. So if there are a lot of John Does, they might be inflating some of the multiple stops. It's interesting to know which members of my department were stopped. So if you break this out by race, you can see there is a large disparity that for the majority of people, they're only stopped once. African Americans, there's a higher proportion of people who are stopped 2, 3, 4, 5, more than 5. So this is I think the maximum was someone was stopped 11. And I think part of the questions that have come up throughout are sort of how do we distinguish normal traffic stops from investigative stops? And it's tough in there's no column in the data set that says investigative traffic stop. And so we have to use proxies like duration or the type of stop or was a search conducted to try and tell us something about how often does this happen. And so this is one way of maybe saying, are these people who were stopped 5 times, are they the subject of an investigation or are they just really bad drivers? And again, I can't tell you with the data, but I can tell you there's a difference. Geographic variation, I know this confused me, it confused my roommates, but these are the beat maps, I guess the sort of 5 geographic areas. In the data, every stop is coded by a geocode within these stops. And then what I have done is to say what proportion of a specific geocode did whites make up in this stop. So the color means that in this specific area in the data set in 2004, 100% of the drivers stopped were whites. The size of the dot represents how many people total were stopped in that area. So small dots, maybe only 1, 2, 3, or 4. Big dots get up into the hundreds. Sorry, it's tough to present these data in one chart. And then in the document, you have broken out,
The dots represent a geocode, though.
a geocode.
Gotcha.
An individual geocode.
That helps me tremendously.
Sorry about that. Yes. And then in the second plots, we've looked at only geocodes with more than 50 stops in a given year, and then connected, this geocode 5765 from year to year to show variation in the proportion of African Americans stopped. And the major variation is between proportions of whites and proportions of blacks over time, that the relative proportion of Asians and Hispanics tends to be between 10 and 5%. But once you start sort of breaking things out by specific areas in geocode, you sort of ask, well, what should we expect? If it is a neighborhood that's predominantly white and it's a residential neighborhood, how many, what is the appropriate baseline? And so that's something we can pursue further. This is variation by officer. So instead of geocode, each dot is a specific officer. Some officers come in and out of the data set. The lines connect officers over the years. So again, what proportion are white? What proportion of an officer stops were African American? Again, what explains this variation is hard for me to say just from the data. It could be their specific beat location, it could be what they're assigned to, it could be racial profiling, it could be any number of things. If you look at the variation though, again, Hispanics, Asians make up a small proportion of total stops and a small proportion of each officer's stops. And so the size of the dot is how many total stops did that officer make in a year. And then this is comparing every officer to an average of the African American officers in the police force, which vary between 1 and 4 over the time years. And so in some years, I'm not quite sure what else to say beyond that's what the data are. They're near the center of the distribution. We can talk more about how you want to compare that. Lastly, so one test of saying, is racial profiling occurring is to say, it's really hard to know what's an investigative stop, what's a traffic stop from the data alone. We don't know what the baseline is. We can posit a baseline, or we can sort of change the question and say, if profiling is occurring, it should be harder to do when it's dark out, when you can't see the race of a driver. And we can leverage the fact that when it's dark out varies over the time of the year. And so there are times in the year, like when you're driving and it's 7 o'clock out and it's light out. And presumably the only thing that differs between me driving at 7 in the summer and me driving at 7 in the winter is that it's either light or dark. And so it's trying to sort of recreate like an experimental ideal where you say, if no racial profiling is occurring, whether it's light or dark out shouldn't matter on the probability that the person stopped is a minority or not. It shouldn't make a difference. The people driving at that time of year should be relatively the same. There are complications to how you do this. You could say, well, even within that inner twilight period, so this period between sort of 4:30 and 8:30, there's variation in people driving at 5 versus 9. Something strange, it seems like there's a dinner effect where there just aren't many stops from 6:30 to 7, and I don't know if that's in the data or if there's a reason for that.
Shift change.
Shift change.
7.
All right, so there we go. So that's something we might want to further control for. But if you think that there's still important variation between 4:30 and 8:30 that you want to control for, if you think there's important variation between the years you want to control for, it sort of changes what the results tell you. So this is just broken out by race. These are all the different models you could run, just a baseline model. So if racial profiling were occurring, we'd expect that when it's dark out, the probability that the person stopped is a minority should be negative. In this case, without controlling for anything else, it's positive. Once you start controlling for the time of day and change how you control for it, the tests sort of change. But the end result is that you get things that some of the tests say provide evidence for racial profiling, some don't, and you're left with what do we make of that? And I would defer to maybe Shinji or others to say, one thing to say is just because you don't reject a hypothesis doesn't mean that you accept that, it's true that no racial profiling is occurring. There are different ways we might look at only moving violations, or we might look at other things. So,
I sort of think that controlling for the number of people within the Champaign County that belongs to each ethnic group is really important.
yeah.
And I think that, so you don't have any stars, so nothing is significant on any of your variables. If you go back to the table. Yeah, so we can, we'll play around with it and look at more subsample sort
Yeah.
of studies and see. Yeah.
That coefficient, though, is now like conditional, right? Because it's interacted with time of day. And so this is trying to say, conditional on it being 7:41, is there an effect? And yeah. But it's inconclusive, and there's, I don't know. So that's all I have. Thank you for your patience. And
Patricia, please.
Work that you put into this. I think it's incredible. You did a fantastic job with all the graphs, and as much as I enjoy all the colorful graphs, I don't know how you do it, work through all of that, but I appreciate the time and the effort you put into providing us with this information. I do have a question in terms of the veil of darkness. I'm wondering if it's possible, and I understand why that was looked at in terms of if it's night, you can't tell the race of a driver. But what if we were to look at geocodes during those twilight hours? Different geocodes, would that make a difference in terms of what the graphs may look like? And we do know that there are higher rates. I think in the geocode 61 seems to be a pretty high rate of stops, opposed to a different geocode, which, you know, like somewhere else. I'm wondering what that statistical data would look like.
Certainly do that. I think it certainly does matter. I don't know, you know, it's tough to say like what the right model is. Thank you, sorry. There are lots of things we could do with the data, and I think looking at geographic variation is certainly important. We can incorporate that into these models in a couple of different ways. So we could look at the beats, we could look at specific geocodes. Problem is when you throw in 200 different geocodes, the models get very inflexible or can be difficult to interpret. But overall, I think there is variation between
Geocodes.
the stops that occur here versus here versus here that I think we want to be able to look at, and that's I think part of what we're working on now.
Okay.
Yeah, I was also kind of happy to see the geocode division because, for instance, beat 61 is a huge beat, and I think part of the reason that the beat might not come into play is because it's crossing all sorts of neighborhoods. And so we should, going by geocode, I think will get us a lot more interesting information, though understanding that that's going to
Yeah.
drop the numbers and.
Of course,
But yeah, I think it's a really important thing
and
to
then
do.
we can look at the population there when she wants to look at just the particular population within our community. That helps with the geocodes, but.
And Andrew and then Shinjini.
Just keeping in
Oh,
mind
Nicole.
also what a transient community we live in, and things change dramatically. And I can tell you, just in the 10 years of this study, there have been dramatic changes on North Lincoln Avenue as far as what the breakdown of the population is, just from something as simple as who the one north and one south apartment complexes are targeting as their
Young
residents.
folks, yeah, kids.
Well, yeah, and it's just, it's
And different
changed
demographics,
dramatically.
foreign
Yes.
students
Yes.
and things like that, yeah. Shinjini.
So I wanted to say that even if we do find a significant difference in, so I don't know what model we'll end up running and what we'll do, but even if we do find significant difference, we have to be very cautious about interpreting that as racial profiling per se, because there are, we'd probably need to control for local crime rates by race. Otherwise, it will be very difficult to attribute anything to racial profiling. So in there's some of the discrimination that happens is statistical, because certain types of populations are going to behave in certain ways. That's what people expect, and it's very difficult to distinguish what is profiling and what is just statistical discrimination that's happening. So we have to be cautious about interpreting any of this, I think. That is not to say that we want it in the community or we shouldn't have policies, but.
So
Just
Nicole,
a-
Eric, and Patricia.
Well,
I hope Nicole deals with that.
You'll see in the questions that I submitted that this issue of the veil of darkness, which I think is a challenging kind of, I need a veil of light in this matter, but I'm just not convinced of its utility. And I hope going forward that I'll be compelled to believe that it's workable for us. Because I'm concerned about how it accounts for, you talked about the fact that African-American drivers tend to drive older vehicles. And so how does the veil of darkness, for example, take into account the issue of tinted windows versus non-tinted windows, or the issues of individual having their windows rolled down during the same times of day that we're looking at? The issue of the veil of darkness is not, I'm just not convinced that it's going to yield what we need it to when we have the data. We have the data telling us that African Americans and Hispanics are being cited, being searched at disproportionate rates. So why do we need another veil to to defend or to complicate our findings. The other thing I'll say too is that this is a leftover question, but in addition to this issue of financial disparity, I think it'll be useful for us to understand the kind of financial impacts of the amount of money that each community is taxed along lines of race. What do the citations look like in real numbers in terms of how communities are disproportionately taxed? I think this is an issue of community impacts as well. But again, there are many considerations on the table, but the veil of darkness to me is, I'm struggling with it because it seems to me that we're spending our time trying to almost to disprove something that the data is telling us that we have some sense of.
So I guess what I would say just that there are sort of different parts of the process we might care about, right? And I think what the veil of darkness can tell us in some sense is like, are attributes of the driver or the car they're driving a factor in whether they get pulled over or not? But what happens after they get pulled over, or are drivers, is a police presence greater in some neighborhoods where the racial makeup is different than, like, it can't tell us that. So I think it's one tool in the toolbox we can look at, right? And so I think there are things that appeal about it, there are things that don't. So, I can't tell you whether, tinted windows or driving with your window, like whether that makes a difference. I guess what I could say is that you might think, that gets thrown into sort of the error in the model, that it should just make the results or the model noisier, but I can't tell you one way or the other.
So,
Yeah.
can I just interject?
Please.
So I think that just having a difference in the proportion of blacks versus whites or Hispanics being pulled over is not necessarily evidence of any profiling, because there are crime rates to consider that may or may not influence the reason they're getting pulled over. So that's not to say there isn't profiling. I believe that there probably is. But in order to actually be able to make a statement, a causal statement, one needs to disentangle how much of the profiling is happening because of actual crime committed versus how much of the pulling over is happening because of the actual crime committed versus real prejudice or real discrimination. And that's the point of the exercise. So just looking at blind rates will not tell you the cause for anything. And what we are trying to do is disentangle the cause, or at least establish there is a causal mechanism.
And in so doing, if we're looking at crime rates, we're going to look at crime rates among whites as well.
Yes,
Absolutely.
of course. Yeah. We'd have to control for all crime rates among all ethnicities and see. I mean, even that may not be perfect.
Because what will be interesting is to consider this, the issue of crime rates versus this consideration of stops.
Eric had a comment.
So I think one thing that I certainly believe is that all of the conclusions that we make, we should be humble in drawing them, because this is very, very complicated, and we're not going to, I'm sure we're not going to give the last word on this. I think it will be useful to look at crime rates and geocodes relative to traffic stops, but then the issue, it's like peeling back the layers. Then a question arises, which many people are concerned about whether there's whether the criminal justice system itself is biased. So so I think we're not going to, I think there are going to be a lot of uncertainties. I do believe that the veil of darkness is useful because it normalizes one factor, which is the ability to visualize the race of the driver by the police officer at the time that the decision is made to stop to make the stop. So I think it's useful. It's not the last word, but I think it's definitely useful. I do think that, in all of the literature that I've been able to read, the only The other thing that I have seen, I've looked, I don't think I've passed this on, but I did find a table with accident statistics broken down by ethnicity and race across the United States. And statistically, there isn't a real deviation across the country in terms of accident rates with race. There's big deviations with respect to age, so the age distribution is really important, but there's no evidence that one racial group is significantly overall better or worse drivers than others.
I think you distributed that last month.
Did I distribute that?
So I've got Patricia, but I wanted to do a time check. Do we have a hard stop at 7 tonight?
No, well, there's not a zoning board of appeals meeting, so
Good,
in
so we have a
terms of
little
the
bit
room
of-
availability,
Okay.
we're fine.
Okay, good, because this is important discussion, and I'm glad we're having it, and I don't want to cut us off too early. Patricia, please.
I would just say that bottom line is that all of the statistics say that there is a disparity, no matter how we slice or dice it. There is a disparity that exists. I think we see that in the data. I don't know why we are not believing our lying eyes, but it's there. If we were stopping Caucasians at a disparaging rate at which we are stopping African American drivers, you would probably find that they have just as much contraband, or they may even be, you may find there's more going on within those drivers as well. But they are not being stopped at a disparaging rate as the African American drivers are. So let's just agree that there is a disparity between these drivers. The data shows that, it reflects that. So when we talk about how we must be careful in saying that it's because the perceptions is there that there's more crime in the African American community. Well, if that's where you are all the time, then of course the rates are going to be higher. So let's be careful when how we talk about that as well. So I'm willing to not continue to be, I think some of us are fatigued with statistics, and in terms of how do we move from where we are to solutions. That's pretty much it. I guess some of this conversation is leading into a different direction in terms of where we need to be going as a committee, and it's almost as if we don't, and I have to agree with Nicole, as if we don't somehow believe the data that we're looking at. We see it, it's there. I don't know what more we're looking for. There are some things that we can look at still, but in terms of just from the raw data, do we even believe that there is a disparity in what we're seeing? It almost seems like we're trying to disbelieve what we are actually seeing. And so I just want to know from a committee standpoint, are we in some disbelief that this does not exist?
So just a quick comment. One of the things, and I'm happy to get input from others, one of the things that I think is clear is that there is a disparity. I don't think anybody on the committee thinks there's not a disparity. I think the examination of the data that Paul is doing is to see if there are answers to the why questions in the data. That if there's statistical information in there, and there may not be, as Eric was speaking, one of the things that went through my mind, and I asked Paul about this before the meeting, the veil of darkness problem may blow up and be completely useless if there is a correlation between not only age of car, year of car, but make, model, color. If that turns out to have some sort of correlation with race, officers can start to pick up on things that do not identify the particular driver. So it may turn out to be a path that, especially for the size of the data, we're just not going to have any useful information out of that. But I think insofar as we can look at data and it starts to give us answers to the why questions, that would be useful output if we can get it. Will, you had a comment.
And I guess I may sound like a broken record, but I continue to only present the things that we talked about as far as time, simply because I'm a numbers guy. I love data. That's why I joined the committee, the subcommittee. But at the same time, I recognize that you could look at data and you could make it whatever you want to make it. In this case, I'm confident with moving forward simply because I know that the data was created in an unbiased manner. You have what I believe, and I could be wrong, is you have 2 white males and 1 African American on the subcommittee, and we equally contributed to the data, meaning that an African American, if only an African American put the data together, maybe some would say that was what was supposed to happen, to create to show a disparity. But the reality is, it wasn't the case. It was 3 members who equally contributed, 2 of them being white, Caucasian males, if you don't mind you just saying that you're white and I'm African American, black. And I say that to say that it's just the raw data. The data can show some things, and we can continue to look into some things, but the reality is we meet once a month, and I'm taking up too much time, so I'll be quiet, but we meet once a month, and that's all I'll say about that. We meet once a month. Subcommittees probably meet maybe an additional time or 2, but as a body, we meet once a month. Now, did I mention that we only meet once a month?
So I had a couple of things I wrote down of information that we probably want to get that were talked about around the table. Definitely adding in the weightings for percentage of population, because I think at the end of the day when we do our report, the disparity is going to be much bigger once we put in those weightings, and I think we need to make it clear that the disparities are not just those little gaps, they're pretty big gaps. Todd,
So
yes?
one of the questions I had is, if you look at the residency data, there tends to be sort of a potential difference between the amount of people who are being stopped, or the proportion of people from Urbana that are being stopped, and sort of the actual data in terms of, and my question, I guess, for you is, when you're talking about weighting the data based upon residency, whether or not you want that to be controlled for the percentage of stops that are actually in a particular geographic area.
So I think we've had this discussion several times coming up to and during these discussions, because we could do it strictly by population of the residents of any particular area. We could try and come up with number of drivers, percentage of race of drivers, but I don't know how available that data is. I'm going to leave it to the folks who work on these things to try and come up with, if not one, then a couple of ways to look at the data so that it can be weighted for the population that we're dealing with. We know that a great percentage of the drivers that are being stopped are local in some sense. And so how we weight the racial and ethnic makeup of the population in order to make a good presentation in our report, we're going to have to do something. And if that means this is our best guess of how to weight these things, we should do that. But I think the numbers as you've presented them so far show a disparity, and I think Shinjini is spot on, as are the others. It's a tiny disparity because you're looking at you're not showing the disparity in the actual populations on top of that. So I think we do need to display those. The other notes I made were separating out the reason for the stop from the reason of the citation. I think we're all interested to see that split. I got, as far as the impact questions, the particular citations, so the cost of those citations is going to be very good data for the impact committee as in addition to number of officers on a particular stop or those kinds of impacts. I'm not sure that Paul's going to have that data, but if you work that through, if that data is not available, I'd say that fact needs to show up in our report
Well,
anyway.
they're not gonna have it either. It's gonna be more so based upon the amount that's charged. by the
I'm
state.
sorry.
Well, I think it's gonna be a mixture between what the written ticket is and what the state's attorney actually charged for.
Right.
And we may be able to get it we may be able to cut around and get it some other way.
And if, right, if we can determine.
I mean,
that
even if we
written-
can determine like an average for each particular violation for the county. for
I think that would
instance.
be good input
Yeah.
into the report. And insofar as any of the data is not available in a way for you, I think that's something we have to cite in the report and say, this is stuff that we have to start caring about. So I think that's very important. And were there any other particular things for the statistics committee that we want them to make sure to tackle?
I don't know if it's the statistics committee, but I'm really curious about why there was such a big decline in stops around 2010. Well, and I guess the question is, was that an artifact of the data gathering, or was in fact there less aggressive policing with respect to data stops?
I don't think that particular point is related to data gathering. I think it's related to what the police department's actually doing.
So change in
And it might
techniques.
be, we tend to walk the borderline of being in crisis for not having enough people almost all the time. And when we lose a couple of people, it tends to limit the amount of time that we're doing anything but answering calls. And so that's some of what you're seeing. There are other things that are reflected in the air there that, like the number of searches. I noticed you saw a sharp decline in that. Some of that, there were some Supreme Court decisions regarding searches subsequent to arrest that impacted some of that, I think, on traffic stops, and perhaps some policy change on when custodial arrests were made and when tickets were issued instead.
So can I follow that up with, are you comfortable in sort of providing some notes on that for the report? Because I think that one of the things, at least that I would really like to see come out of this, and I think probably everybody, would be a greater level of transparency between the community and the police department, so that, and in particular in this case, so that community understands, why the police department does what it does.
So if I hypothesized on why I see some of the changes that I saw, why they might exist, and understanding that it's simply a.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's right.
I
think
can put
that's
something together that would
Yeah.
look through the graphs and.
Yeah, and I think, I think we understand it's not a result of a scientific study, but it's an informed judgment about why these trends were occurring. To me, that would be really very valuable.
So yeah, I think that would be a useful communication between you and Paul and the other statistics folks. If there are other things that folks want our statistics people to gather together, I know Nicole had a great list of questions here. I had a couple, most of which I think got answered tonight, but I'm going to go through my notes again. Please do email Todd and have him forward to Paul, so that by next month we can start to remove the picture of the tables and put in some tables. I think that would be a good output. So I don't want to shortchange folks, but I do understand we're running late here. Let's go through the other three committees, and I'll ask you if there's anything that you think we ought to be discussing tonight, and we can table some stuff for next time. But with regard to the police procedure and public engagement, Nicole, were there particular notes you wanted to discuss in the meeting tonight?
I'm going to defer to Andrew, who has the report.
Ah, excellent.
The majority of our subcommittee meeting got somewhat derailed into why the police do what they do and how it impacts the community. I think that I will defer on some of this until the next meeting, and I can put something together and have some information for you.
Great, I appreciate that. All right. Any questions or things that other folks think we need to put toward the Police Procedure Public Engagement Committee? Okay, Patricia, anything with the Community Impact Committee that you think we should be discussing this evening?
No, I'm going to defer, but I just would like to share with the committee that Alejandra and I are on this committee together. We met yesterday. And I think that we did agree that we would be looking at specific impacts, and I would just like to share those with the committee. And we can go into
please.
We can go into greater detail. And if you think that the committee should be looking at any other impacts that this might have. So we like to look at we've talked about it, the financial economic impacts, the social and the media impacts that these traffic stops may have, the psychological and the physiological impacts that they have. And so those are the areas in which we are doing our research in terms of what kind of community impacts are as a result of the traffic stops. And the one thing that I would like to share is that I found something that I thought might be worth looking at, a model. This is the impact of driver's race, gender, age during traffic stops, assessing the interaction terms and the social conditioning model. I don't know what that looks like, and I would like to have time to review that. So it sounds interesting, and I would like to look at that. I think the media does have an impact on the attitudes, so I think that's going to be very useful information to add into our report. And the other thing that Alejandra and I thought that we would like to see is some self-reporting in terms of how do you might be thinking, how do you measure psychological or that whole physiological impact? How do you measure that? So that would be, I won't go in, and I would defer my story at another time, but if we have some self-reporting, and that would be where we would invite the community. And I know there are some questions that we'd like to get from our police department, but I think there's also some questions and answers we'd have to get from our community in terms of impact. So Alejandra and I agreed that might have to be some self-reporting, not scientific, maybe some anecdotal, but very important in terms of that the social and the perception in the relationship between the community and our police department.
Alejandra, you had something?
Yeah, so the idea of that is basically, and we want to ask this to Todd, is how practical or how feasible you see that we can invite members of the community along with law enforcement to come and do a brief presentation of what is their experience on a traffic stop, and we can see, because it's a community impact, and we want to have the whole people who is affected, as well as the community and law enforcement when they're doing the stop. So we want to see if this is something possible to
Yeah.
do in the future.
Absolutely. If you give us the names of who you'd like to see, or if you'd like us to find however you want to do it, we can help facilitate.
Okay.
Thank you. And just the one last
Yes.
thing that I read, what I think that the committee would find, psychologists have done extensive research on how stereotypes affects the assumption about other people, particularly how members of the majority groups perceive members of minority groups. So that's, I think, very important. Jennifer Eberhardt has researched stereotypes and implicit biases. And so there may be some overlap between Nicole's committee and ours as well. So we may have to, I can see that we might have to have some discussions based on the questions that she's asked from her committee. But any other thing coming out of our committee, we would defer and take a little more time to do our research and talk with the staff about how we can have the community's actual be a part of our report.
Oh, that sounds great. The two things that popped into my head as we were going, first of all, that the last bit about the biases and stuff, not only will go into, I think, the subsections on impact and the subsections on the community and
right.
public engagement, but just in terms of, I've started thinking of the introduction that I'm probably going to be heavily involved in writing, and I think that would be great information. With regard to bringing in folks from the community, and you're going to have to judge how much time you all have
Right.
and how many folks you can bring in addition to individual accounts, which I think would be great, also talking to teachers, counselors, other folks in town who might have contacts with groups of folks who are affected as opposed to individuals, and getting them to come talk about their experiences. As soon as you started talking, I thought, well, we've got another year of work we could do on that alone. However you can slice and dice this to get us some good information into the report, that would be great.
Okay.
I appreciate
We
that.
will control that.
Thank you. All right. And any other questions for Alejandra and Patricia at this point? Yeah, Paul, please.
The only thing I would say is that there's a great book that just came out called Pulled Over. That is, so you're familiar, that is a study, I think, in Kansas City, where they've both interviewed people in depth in their experiences and then also surveyed drivers who were stopped and weren't stopped, and it's, I think, gets to a lot of those concerns. So
If
Pulled
one or-
over, who's the,
Yeah, if you could give
I'll
the
send it through
Okay,
Tom.
thank
Yeah,
you.
send out the citation information.
thank you.
In fact, with our budget, what we can do is we can purchase a few copies
Oh, that
for
would
the
be fabulous.
committee. And
That would be great.
Wonderful.
I won't promise we can purchase 11 or 10, but we'll get close.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good. So, and we got a report from the Social Science Committee by email. Was there anything you wanted to talk about during the meeting?
No, I think I have worked into the conversation the things that I would have said. I'll try to add a little narrative around the documents that I sent.
I appreciate that. Any questions for Eric at this point?
Those were good documents. I was trying to start reading those. Thank you, Eric, for sending those out.
All right, so that's our subcommittee reports. Thank you all. It sounds like we're moving along at a good clip here. I fear what's coming up in the spring when we have to get all of this into one big report, but that's why they paid us all the big bucks, I guess. All right, so that concludes old business. I see no new business on the agenda. Did anyone have anything we needed to add in? So let's go straight to public input. We do have two members of three members officially of the audience, but I recognize one as press. Did anyone want to give public input tonight? And I'm glad to give you, your full 5 minutes. So. Good, good. And please introduce yourself and,
I'm Daryl Cruz, and of course I've been following this topic for 8 years, and I really appreciate the work and the discussion that you've had tonight. I think you're doing a lot of wonderful inquiries, and hopefully they'll result in some very productive recommendations in the end. What I think as you're progressing, you're going to find there's going to be more community interest in what you're doing. And I would ask the city or you, for example, to get your website up to date. In other words, I think we should have email addresses for each of you on the website. And if there's information like the public would love to see if it's appropriate, like the sheets of questions or the reports Eric had or other things that get distributed. I've never had access. There are other people in the public. They haven't been posted yet.
the stuff that we were discussing tonight?
Evidently not.
Because I pulled them.
Yeah.
The questions, the list of questions that Nicole provided
we will get out the
were
documents
late.
So I'm
as
just
quickly as
asking,
we
I'm not
can.
complaining about it. I'm just saying if we can get all of it current, okay, so people can go, and if they want to make contact with members, they can do that. And I think that you're going to find there may be more interest as you're moving on. So if we can just get that done. A couple of very quick comments. If you look at the data also, and you were talking about the number of stops, and I did this, if you look, there's been 3 different police chiefs during those 10 years. And you can see, if you want, when the transition occurred from one chief to another in terms of maybe some significant change. So one question I would like to ask you is, what influence does the chief have on traffic stop policy, the type of policing that goes on in terms of enforcement of traffic laws? Is it a priority or not? And it's kind of interesting to see that transition, because I think the key player here is the chief of the department many times, and that needs to be brought into and looked at potentially in terms of what his primary goals are or emphasis that maybe the city council sets or that he senses from the community, and how that gets translated into traffic stop enforcement. Okay. I would also suggest, if you look at the data, that the Kewan Carrington shooting in Champaign directly affected traffic stops. I would suggest that there are dramatic community incidents, and if you look at Champaign immediately after that, that you'll see traffic stops decrease consistently the years following. And when Chief Cobb was hired, there's a difference. There was a different dynamic going on in terms of the community discussion. And I think there's some contextual information with the ACLU contacting the police departments about consent searches a couple years ago, and there was conversations held with the chiefs on that issue. And I think the public emphasis on some of those issues by community organizations play a role. These things don't happen in a vacuum. They happen within the context of the community, and there's things at a certain point in time. You can almost plot data timelines and see the effects of some of these things. I suggest you might want to look at that and how that plays into it. I would also say the investigative stops is a very interesting topic I still can't wrap my head around. And I would simply say that I understand when a car is stopped for a traffic stop, that it can lead into an investigative stop. I do not understand the nature of an investigative stop being consciously done prior to the stop. So if there's a pretext, we talk about, an investigative stop. Are investigative stops initiated with a traffic stop being the pretext for the investigation prior to it, or as part of the stop? Then you find other things and you do an investigation. I heard last time it being suggested that you possibly have this drug house, or you may have this party, and the police are contacted, and sometimes there's a suggestion we need to look in certain areas and watch certain people, so that the stop becomes the pretext for the investigation ahead of time. That I see as a problem. If the investigation is occurring as a result of a normal traffic stop, then I would think the investigative stops would be racially proportional to the stops that are occurring. Okay, so if you look, and there's probably no way to tell if an investigative stop might, whether data can gather that or not, to see if in fact there's a racial disparity in terms of investigative stops that could be pre-stop, mental. It's all police discretion. Stops are all discretionary. It's what's going on. The answers to the questions are with the officers on the street, the beats. There needs to be more questions that, if you can, that can drill down and ask them, to help explain why they think this is going on. Why does the Urbana Police Department, why does the officer think the disparity exists? Do they see it as a problem? Do they see it as being acceptable? Why do they think it's occurring? The officers themselves have a lot of answers, and they can help the community and themselves to be able to wrestle with the why. And so the data is great. The questions you talked about are wonderful. You're going in a lot of really appropriate ways, I feel. But I think you need to engage the Urbana Police Department, from the chief to the officer on the beat, in some way of getting, you suggested a survey or something at one time, Eric. I think that's still something that should be on the table, could be pointed in terms of getting some feedback in terms of how they view it or what they're policing in certain neighborhoods. I'd be very careful about using residency and crime rates and something there that's really kind of trying to sidestep the issue a little bit in terms of the stops, because I don't care if they come from Chicago or Danville or Southern Illinois. If there's a racial disparity, as a community, I want even the people that come into the community to be free of that racial disparity, if they live here or not. And you can break it out both ways, but I don't think it justifies the disparity any way at all. So I appreciate the work. I know it's going to get harder, and you're going to face greater challenges than you did tonight, but I applaud you to stay focused and stay on task, because this is so critically important in terms of what's going on in our state, in our community, in the country. And it's the majority of the community, the white population of Caucasian, that have to keep pushing this issue, because it's not affecting them. It's affecting our friends and neighbors of minority populations. And therefore, I encourage our white community members to stay abreast, to stay involved and concerned about this disparity. Thank you.
Any questions, clarifications? Obviously, we can reserve discussion of things that Daryl has brought up. But any other questions for Daryl? Thank you.
You do.
One of the reasons we went back and forth about where public input should take place, but I hope as the public gives input, and I know we're running very late tonight, if we could scribble down those issues and bring them up as part of our discussion items next time. Some of them are exceedingly important.
Absolutely.
All right, and so let me get back to my agenda, which I've now lost track of. Here we go.
I think we should thank Mr. Cruz for submitting information to the committee. So I would just say thank you, because we did receive some information from him, and I would like to say thank you for that.
And one thing, and Daryl and I have talked about this a little outside of the meeting, but I really do not only appreciate that input beforehand, the written input, but I think it's even more effective. You have a very short period of time to be able to present a couple of points at the table. That written input we can really chew on and digest and formulate more questions for next time. So I think it's very important, and I do appreciate it very much. Anything from the staff tonight?
No report.
All right. Any announcements from any of the task force members? With that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion by Patricia, second by Eric. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. We are adjourned.
Thank you.